Are you interested in expanding your crystal collection, but not quite sure which ones to buy? Maybe you're a little bit intimidated on working with them, or maybe you just don't know what to start out with. We are going to talk about all that and more on today's episode. I'm your host, Ray Madrano, and welcome to Woo Woo. Hello, everyone, and today we have our guest, Nicholas Pearson, author of Crystal Basics and Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia. Hi, Nicholas. How are you?
Hi there, Ray. I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Wonderful. I am really grateful that you could carve out time to be here with us. You have been super inspirational to me in so many different realms and ways. When I first discovered Nicholas, I was scrolling through Instagram and you were doing a live or something like that, and you were just giving out so much information. It was at an earlier point in my crystal journey, my metaphysical journey. And if I had to calculate how many things spun off of just knowing that you exist that was so life changing was really, really cool. I mean, College of Psychic Studies classes, your books, your knowledge, your education. Can you tell us more about who you are and where you come from and your background, just to catch our audience up to speed?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to stay connected. So first and foremost, thank you. My background starts with the love of rocks. It seems really kind of innocuous, just little inert bits of matter in the landscape. I was the kid who picked them up everywhere, and my grandfather, probably around the age of 8, he saw this over many years and gave me my first piece of quartz, which is currently in a case in the other room. But it was just a piece of clear quartz like this, and that that kind of humble piece of the environment was transformed, transfigured into something luminous and regular and gemmy, and had interesting phenomena as light passed through it. So I was hooked. I've never looked back. I've been a mineral collector probably longer than I've been anything else other than human, and I always seek to explore the phenomena around me. So, if I'm out in nature, I want to see what's in bloom. I want to see what the foliage is like. I want to know what kind of soil's under my feet. And I don't really know where that comes from, except that my dad had a science background and I was a curious kid. So we learned a lot together. We'd go to the library all the time. I grew up in a pretty non-religious household, especially when it was just my dad and me. So I kind of consider our weekly trips to the library like our visit to the Cathedral of Learning. And one week it might be earth science, the next week it might be marine biology because I grew up in a coastal town, and then my other great love was fairy tales and folklore and mythology. And I've always loved how these kind of two seemingly very different perspectives, science versus spirituality, we'll just broadly lump all those things together, correctly or not, it'll work for the sake of the argument. They're just different ways of making sense out of the world. It's different ways that we understand our role in things, how we can be in better relationship to the world around us. It's just humans' attempt at making meaning. So once I kind of got that little light bulb to go off, I could reconcile that science and spirituality can work in slightly different ways. One through the measurement of data, and the other through symbol and metaphor, and understand that one doesn't have to cancel the other out, that they can actually enrich one another. So that kind of fueled my personal growth. I
Wow,
kind of
can I
took
can I pause you right there? Like how pivotal that opinion and that phrase of how they both can even each other out. They work in unison, and symbiosis is kind of where I was finding myself even with the creation of this podcast. I love fairy tales. I love fantasy. I love magic, visual effects. I'm a very visual person. And so the marriage between the mysticism of how crystals can work with us or affect us and the science behind it, I always go back to, we didn't realize what lightning was many, many centuries ago. And now we have a scientific explanation. And I feel like a lot of things that sit in the woo woo category or the mystical and unexplained will eventually have an explanation by science. We just haven't quite caught up yet. So I really appreciate your point of view on that. I'm sorry to interrupt. We can go back into it, but I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, that's kind of, you know, the open door to finding a sense of wonder. Whether we do that through analyzing data, whether we do that by quantifying something, or whether we do that by just sitting back in amazement, that for me is kind of like the underlying, we'll say, litmus test of authenticity in my practice. Does this inspire wonder? And if not, then what am I doing wrong here? So I love science. Science opens doors for me. Science helps me, get to know rocks and minerals in a very tangible and visceral kind of way in many regards. I know whether something is safe to handle, how to display it, how it's going to interact with other things, my environment. But, without that kind of mystical element, I don't know that I would have gotten so far into the science either. But, thankfully, my dad encouraged me to learn, so I made my own conclusions as early on as I could. But as a kid, there's only so much access you've got. So I was very self-taught, and eventually I stumbled across this topic of crystal healing, where people referenced discrete rocks and minerals. So there was my love of science could come through, but they would often kind of sample from folklore and mythology, and the historical practices of lapidary medicine, even before those terms were coined.
That term, lapidary medicine. I've never heard that term. That is so cool. I thank you for introducing us to that.
Yeah, so let's give credit where credit is due. There's a really wonderful scholar by the name of Nicola E. Harris. I forget her affiliation for the moment, but she wrote a wonderful paper on the history of lapidary medicine. Her specialization, among other things, includes the history of medicine. I'm from what I understand, thanks to the internet, I don't know her on a personal level. I just know her work. She is putting together a book based on the same topic. But lapidary medicine explores a whole lot of things that overlap, and they happen to be things that I already enjoy the overlap of. So obviously we've got to understand what rocks and minerals are and the different kinds of cultural, linguistic, religious views around them. We have to understand the context in which healing occurs. That's a historical context. That's a social context. That is, what is the paradigm of healing that we're approaching. So, in classical Greece, that looks very different than medieval France. And, the idea of lapidary medicine is that we're looking at all the roles that rocks have played in health and well-being, in many different parts of society. So that's, spiritual healing. That is the kind of magical practice of these talismanic and amuletic gems that come from the classical era. We're looking at things that are actual geopharmaceuticals, like medicines made from rock and mineral, which we actually use today. I mean, maybe not as much as things of phytochemical or plant origin, but they still exist. We're looking at
Yeah.
traditional medicine. We're looking at magical medicine. We're looking at it all. So, in crystal healing, we see little threads that connect to all of these other ideas. So I could satisfy the science by learning the geology, the mineralogy behind it. But then I could also give myself permission to be woo woo and feel the energy of something. And that kind of became my area of focus. I read as much as I could on all kinds of spiritual topics, meditation and mindfulness, witchcraft, esotericism, hermetic principles. I mean, you name it. If I could get my hands on it, I would. But it was definitely that little niche, that little slice of heaven that was crystals that became the mainstay of my focus, because it was the perfect place where I could bridge two of my great loves.
That's really wonderful. I have a similar experience with that. I dabbled. I researched from a young age because I come from a Hispanic background with brujeria, folklore, folk magic, as I call it, like Spanish folk magic. And my parents were very Catholic. I was raised in a very Catholic religious household. And so they refused to acknowledge what they were doing, certain rituals or things or treatments for ailments that were energetic working practices or folk magic. And they're always like, no, 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 we don't practice witchcraft, we're not anything like that. And so I battled with that a lot in my youth, and it prompted me to really just explore what's out there as far as esotericism and different religions, meditations. I discovered Reiki early on, and I remember getting to a point where I felt like to do any kind of energy work, I didn't need anything physical, if that makes sense. I never really got into crystals in my youth or any kind of minerals for that reason, because I got to a point where I thought, I don't need a spell. I don't need an altar. I don't need herbs. I don't need whatever. If I just find myself in deep meditation, I can work some really cool things. For whatever reason, maybe 2 years ago, I found myself walking into a metaphysical rock shop. Manifestation was like a huge buzzword. It was a huge thing 2 years ago. And probably, the lockdown and whatnot had a lot to do with that. Just seeking something deeper. And I discovered this really cool quartz. And the guy that sold it to me, he was more on the science side. So when I used a word like manifestation, he was like, oh, whatever. He kind of talked down to me. It's almost like that machismo. And I was like, no, no, I'll meet you on the science aspect, the geological facts of it and the scientific makeup of it. I'm down to party with that as well. But he was very dismissive of what I was looking for spiritually. And I got this really cool quartz. And when I say I was buzzing, like on the way home, on my drive, when I got back to my apartment, I just felt so charged, like I had done several shots of espresso, like I just pounded so much coffee. And I remember our conversation, and he said that he has come so close to selling that. And it was a very expensive piece of quartz. There's a lot of really cool things going on with it that I can't remember what each one means. There's like record keepers and rainbows and inclusions and all sorts of gnarly stuff, and like things that make it a manifestation quartz, so to speak. And I remember him saying, man, I've had this for years, and every time somebody comes in, they just come on the verge of buying it. And because it was fairly expensive, a lot of people just didn't want to invest that much into that particular piece. And so he knocked the price down a little bit, he said, over the years. But when I found it, I just knew we needed to be together. And I know that you understand what I'm talking about. There's a lot of, new listeners and people that are like, what? But I just knew it was almost like it was calling to me, and the vibration and the buzzing. And that was my intro to crystals and rocks and minerals a few years ago, that I feel like has now catapulted me onto this wild, extremely coincidental journey, like things keep happening, doors keep opening. I keep going further and further down the rabbit hole, but I find myself kicking myself, kind of just like, why wasn't I into crystals and rocks a few years ago or 20 years ago? And I kind of get bummed out about that, but I realize that our journey is what it is. We discover things when we're supposed to discover things. And you've always been involved with rocks and minerals and specimens, but when it comes to like energy working, do you find yourself, the rocks and the crystals, do they help you? Do they hinder you? Are they totally different energies? I don't know if I'm wording that question correctly.
Yeah, I think I pick up what you're putting down. So,
Okay.
My relationship with Reiki has developed a lot in the, I think, 17 years that I've practiced. So I initiated originally in a fairly westernized school of Reiki. My teacher, though, half Japanese, inspired a lot of love and respect for culture of origin. And, even that idea of it having a singular culture of origin is thanks to some really good academic work being done by people like Dr. Justin Stein and Leon Horowitz and so many other wonderful people. We're seeing that it's a very circulatory kind of development. But I started coming to Reiki because I was already using crystals, working with crystals for that kind of energetic perspective. And I wanted to deepen my appreciation of energy. And now I think of,
I love that.
yeah, now I think of Reiki more phenomenologically rather than energetically. Reiki is a pervasive state that holds the universe together rather than like a discrete bandwidth. It's not a wavelength or a frequency. It's not an energy. And in fact,
Wow.
if the things that we experience and say, I think before we go further, let's return to the word Reiki. So a lot of people think of Reiki as energy healing, energy medicine. We might try to gloss that term Reiki into English as, spiritually guided life force or universal life force. And I think that is a functional gloss, but it's not a literal translation.
Yeah.
Some literal translations could include things like soul energy, mysterious quality, numinous presence. So they really kind of speak to something that is in itself unspeakable. It is ineffable. So when we kind of shift perspective and we view Reiki as this immaterial phenomenon, it does in fact break some laws and limitations that we expect energy as a discrete thing we can measure to demonstrate. So to get back to the question now, that gives us some context to situate this. I originally came to Reiki because I was seeking to better understand energy. I ended up taking out of that the fact that the energy is subsequent to the state of being. And from that kind of phenomenological perspective, looking at Reiki as this pervasive state, this union of heaven and earth, this connection, this non-duality. Reiki is present in all things, so it's present in
Yeah.
rocks and minerals and birds and trees and flowers and kettles and cows and carpets. So I don't find myself anymore relying on external tools when I practice the system of Reiki, because that's not
Got it.
required. But I can't separate Reiki as that cosmic phenomenon from all the other stuff that I do. So even if I'm making a crystal grid or doing laying on of stones, my
It's
innate
there.
training, my practice, my background, I would hope that when I enter that kind of trance state, that altered state of consciousness, that meditative zone, that I'm aware of that pervasive quality of Reiki in all things, even if I'm not engaging with the practice of Reiki when I'm building a crystal grid, it's still there.
That's such a beautiful way to put that. Thank you for clearing that up. Reiki was my first understanding of energy, life force, all around movement, and like you said, it's like a different bandwidth. It's its own thing, but it's present in all things. And so I think I always go towards that as my first experience, if that makes sense, with working with energy. And as I've come along in my journey, I've been able to differentiate different frequencies, different types of energy. And I think that's why I appreciate crystals so much now. I don't think that I would have an appreciation for rocks and crystals and minerals. Plants, like you said, different animals, species. It's like that awareness just clicked, and then once you become aware, then you can become appreciative, or maybe vice versa. But it's a beautiful thing. I like that. I would like to talk about this new amazing book that you have out. You guys, you have to get this amazing pocket size 450 gemstones. I mean, come on. And also, do you have any more signed copies? Because I kind of got a nice little signature from you in Tucson, and I'm really grateful that you did that meet and greet. It was awesome.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hopefully, I always have signed copies available. You can find those on my website, and in my socials, there'll be links for everything too.
So I guess the big question I have is, yeah, I've got this one too. 200, 200 to 450. And there's a gemstone, or, there's a mineral that is in this one that is not in this one. And I
Mhm.
was a little sad, but I would like to know your process on how you came up with the number, which stone. I mean, 450 is a lot. Yeah. And there are so many different more that you could include, but what was your driving force for what made the cut and what didn't?
Well, I'm really curious to know what your
Mhm.
sad didn't make the cut, because there weren't too many that didn't make it. But it was multifaceted. So first off, I think I should be really transparent and say I had no intention of writing a pocket encyclopedia. At no point in my many, many years of dreaming of becoming a writer, and then, the last several years of actually being one, did I anticipate this kind of project. It just wasn't on my
Can I
radar.
stop you right there? How many publications have you written? How many books have you written so far that have been
So
published?
this is my eighth book to reach shelves.
That's so cool. And how many years?
I signed my first contract in 2014.
Congratulations. That
Thank you.
is incredible. Continue.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I wanted to
Oh,
get
you're
that out there.
good.
That's a great for somebody who didn't really anticipate going down that route, and for you to have the success that you have. I think that's wonderful and should be celebrated.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've wanted to be a writer for a long time. It never really came up, and then um, it was my sixth book in where I finally wrote like a 101 kind of book, Crystal Basics. I mean, it's more than basic. That's for sure. We could think of it as
Yes.
like foundational versus basic,
I
and
love
it
that.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
it did really well. People loved it. Everything about how I wrote it was very calculated. I wanted it to reflect my personal journey and perspective. Of course, it cites other research, but really it was like how I approach things now, how I got to where I am, what are the thought processes that go behind everything, the analysis, all that fun stuff. And I got wonderful feedback based on that. But one of the recurring critiques that I got was, it's really big. I'm like, well, yes, it's a textbook. That's kind of the point. But I also saw the
I mean,
limitation
and
weighing so much.
it's big, but the images of the stones are beautiful. Um, I get what they're saying. I get what you're saying, but I feel like it's kind of needed in every library. Just saying.
I agree, but it also kind of sparked the idea for a companion volume, something that was more portable, but I wanted it to have deeper reach, have more depth of coverage. So I was initially kind of coming up with the idea of a little pocket companion. I'd write a few short intro chapters to kind of introduce the idea of crystals to people, the barest minimum of geology meets metaphysics, and all kind of fresh stuff. And with the popularity of crystals rising exponentially every year upon what it was the year before, it just seemed like something pocket sized would be a really good entry point for so many people. So I actually had a wish list of a little over 600 crystals for this. And,
Wow.
and that led me to see if my publisher would be interested in like subsequent volumes, a volume one, a volume two, volume three. They were not. So that had me go
Ah,
back to the original idea.
rude.
Right. Well, there's a lot of reasons why. Without divulging too much of the market in the process, when you attach a number to something as a volume, the the higher the number, the fewer copies it will sell,
Ah,
because you know, to buy volume three, it assumes someone has already bought volumes two and one,
yeah,
and doesn't always work that way. So,
got it.
um, so we settled on one pocket volume, at least as it stands today, and I had to whittle that list of over 600 down to something manageable, and I settled on 450 as my number, not knowing if we were actually going to be able to keep all 450.
Yeah,
And that meant I wanted to have things that I didn't have in any of my other books. I wanted to make sure I had rocks that I couldn't find in any book, period. So there are some things that, to the best of my knowledge, don't appear in any other crystal book yet. That'll
yeah,
change as the market changes, as more books are published, of course. I wanted to maybe leave behind a few things that weren't as popular and as exciting as I thought they might be, and introduce some weird and unusual stuff that I don't think is appreciated as much as it should be. And most importantly, I wanted to make space for common rocks, because this is something I've personally been kind of grappling with a lot over the last couple of years, but something that's been on the horizon for a while for me now, but especially the last few months has been like weighing heavy on me. And it's the fact that chief among all these kind of holistic modalities, um, when we think of crystal healing, it is an inherently consumer practice. You have to buy stuff to do it. Herbalism, you could forage. I mean, hypothetically, if you could, rig your own still, you could make your own essential oils and hydrosols and other things. Would you still have to have some input for that? Yes, but there's this larger conversation about privilege and power and wealth and capitalism and consumerism that I haven't quite figured out. But there is a way around it if we start looking at what's beneath our feet, like what rocks are in our landscape. Rocks are made out of minerals. Minerals, by definition, are naturally occurring in organic crystals. So rocks should be used in crystal healing. And I mean, truth be told, some of the really popular gems that we think of are actually rocks and not,
Yeah.
discrete minerals like lapis lazuli or jade could be great examples of that. So I wanted to make sure there's space for like flint and chalk and granite and schist and other things like that. So people didn't feel like they were required to go out and buy the most expensive emerald or the best quality ruby, because it's great if that is within your means, but you shouldn't feel disempowered just because it's not in your means. So, taking all those different categories of things I was hoping to accomplish in 450 stones together, I had to cull a few from the 200 that were in Crystal Basics. I think part of what that does is it means that Basics has things some of my other books don't have. So, there's some originality there.
Yes.
Every book I've published has at least a few things that none of my other books have in it. And then eventually that list came together. And then very, very late in the game, I yanked two more out of the Pocket Encyclopedia to put two new ones in. And those last two were Fascia Jasper and Blue Rose Quartz.
Nice. Blue rose quartz is something that I have recently come into contact with, and or discovered for myself, I should say, and it's something that I wish I knew a little bit more about. Can I do want to bring attention to our audience. One of my favorite things about your book is that you have, for every mineral specimen that you're writing about, you have a physical healing aspect of it, you have a psychological healing aspect of it, and you have a spiritual healing aspect of it. What prompted you to do that? Because I do like that you're, and especially in the pocket size edition, you're so to the point. And I have so many crystal books. I have a large library of different type of crystal books, and a lot of them kind of they drag out what they're trying to say about it. And yours is just, it's sharp, it's to the point. Is that for the sake of just compressing it into a pocket size edition? I mean, is there more that you wish you could talk about with each thing, or why is that? Because I love it. It speaks to my personality very much.
I tend to be a little long-winded in life. I think of myself as a kind of storyteller. The kind of works that I write are not necessarily narratives. I don't think I'm a very good like narrative storyteller. I couldn't make up a novel. Maybe I could. I've never really tried. But I'm
I
I'm
bet you could.
always trying to tell some story, paint a picture with something, and that's just not an option with this trim size and the formatting and everything. So I had to learn a new skill set, and that is brevity being the key to clear communication. So there could be no extraneous words on the page. So part of that kind of breakdown in the body, mind, spirit, we could say, physical, psychological, spiritual characteristics of the stones, is because I think it's an easy way to group them. It was the same grouping I used in the full-sized Crystal Basics. And
Yes.
I think it's also a good way for us to, like, as humans, categorize, well, what am I really aiming for? Am I coming because I feel unwell in my heart space? Or is there something about my spiritual path I'm working on? Is there something in my material realm that I'd like to focus on? So we can just kind of see those keywords lead us forward. But as far as choosing the words that went on this page, it was, I started with approximately 200 stones from Crystal Basics, and then I had to reduce it to not even full sentences. And as a writer, that's a really hard thing to do. I've never produced a book that is largely not in sentences. It's a bunch of lists. So that was a
You're right. Yeah, no, definitely. But it works for this. It totally works for that. If you don't mind, I would love to ask you questions that I've tried to research myself about certain minerals and specimens that I haven't quite got answers to. Would
yeah,
you mind indulging me with that?
sure, it'd be my pleasure.
Oh, and actually, the you said that you were wondering which stone was not included in this. It was onyx, and that leads me to our first question. Blue onyx. Have you heard of it? What is it?
Yeah. So, there's a little bit of a nomenclature problem. I will mention that onyx is in the book, but it's under B for black onyx. So,
Perfect. Okay.
But let's start with nomenclature. Let's start with the word onyx, and then we'll talk about how its designation has shifted over a millennia or more. So we get the word in English from a Greek root that means fingernail. So if you look at a fingernail, especially one that isn't polished, you'll see these little ridges in it, and they all run parallel to one another. So the onyx stone was originally just about any rock that had parallel bands, or a level banded agate most commonly. So they could be more opaque, they could be more transparent. Other things that had more or less that kind of parallel line structure have gotten called onyx over the years. But
Yes.
originally, it would be in the kind of chalcedony umbrella, the variety of
Yeah.
quartz that's full of these little micro crystals. But tastes change over time. So onyx was a really popular gem up through the medieval period, because in the kind of classical era forward, you could carve things like stamps, intaglios, cameos in them, and by excavating the different strata, the different layers, you could have this stark contrast of gray or white against black or brown or red. But as taste changed, particularly in the Victorian era, when black mourning jewelry kind of rose to prominence and jet became very popular, black onyx became the most popular version of it. So then we desired monochrome onyx, and the standard became treating just about every piece of onyx that came out of the earth to make its color more even. So that's why it gets the special designation in this book, black onyx. But then also, we have the challenge of what this term meant in ancient Greece, classical Greece, isn't necessarily what it meant in medieval Europe, and it's also not necessarily what it means in, modern day Arabic or any other language. So we currently are reconciling all these differences in translation of terms and translation of concepts. And nowadays we get a lot of materials that are not what we think of as geologically onyx, that microcrystalline form of quartz. As long as they're level banded or parallel banded, they still sometimes get that designation. So things like Mexican onyx, Pakistani onyx, they're actually calcite, or a mixture of calcite and dolomite, or calcite and aragonite. They could be travertine or flowstone, which are also carbonate rocks. So this blue onyx material is actually a variety of calcite that comes from Argentina. It's sold
Yes,
under a variety of trade
I
names.
thought it was calcite and chalcedony, right? It's like and
Um,
it's in parallel banded form from Argentina.
just different colors of calcite,
Okay.
due to different kinds of iron in it. Sometimes you'll have reddish bands from iron oxide crystals. Other times you get like the difference between ferrous and ferric and tetravalent iron. So all of that can give us like different colors that the iron will code for when it substitutes in the crystal structure. But essentially, it's little bits of iron that are in there, and it comes out this kind of aqua blue color.
Hmm.
And so that leads to one of its names being aquatine calcite, which is just a totally superfluous term when we can just use the color aqua, right? So it does technically appear in the book, but as aqua calcites, if you go to the calcite section, comma aqua, it'll be in there. So that's the stuff that's sold
Ah.
through onyx.
So
I picked a wasn't
it like opened right up to it too. That's funny. I and again, as you're talking through this, I'm like, man, I wish Nick, I had like pocket-sized Nicholas that could go shopping with me everywhere because, and I do.
kind of
What I what what I do love about what you're doing though, you're kind of taking certain trade names and you're just stripping them down to the basics of what they are and what they're made up of. And I think you're totally right. So many things have over the years, or translations, they have different names, different things, and you can go back to like the bare, mineral structure of, the chemical structure of what makes the mineral. But when we started talking about the specimen, the first thing I asked her was, is this a form of blue calcite? And she said, oh, no, 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 that is onyx. It's from a closed down mine in Argentina. You can't even get it anymore. And she was saying that it's hard to find, it's becoming really rare. And then she started doing the whole shopkeeper upsell thing with me of just, well, it's rare now and it's super hard to get. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I ended up buying all of the pieces that she had because, I'm like, well, if it's rare, I might as well just keep it in my collection and wait, to pass it along to somebody else if you know, it was really pretty, really pretty. As I started trying to research it, and the same with another stone I recently came into contact with, which is called blue manganese, which we can get to, or manganese, blue manganese quartz, in quartz. I don't know. We'll get to that in a second. Um, yeah, I felt kind of dumb. You know, I was like, oh, I bought the dialogue, I bought into the whole thing, and then as I'm kind of researching it, I'm like, it's basically blue calcite, and it's not to take anything away from it. I do vibe with the stone, otherwise I wouldn't have purchased it, but you know, I just having those kind of experiences why I think it's so important for someone as knowledgeable as you to really share that with all of us, because who wants to walk away from something like that just feeling like you know, same with Super 7. And you know, I don't I don't want to get too much involved with that, but I can't tell you how many pieces of amethyst that I bought that, you know, they have the praciolite, which is the green, and you know, like citrine, smoky quartz, all of the inclusions, and they're really pretty, they're beautiful, and I love them, but they're being labeled as something else. And you know, as much as they like the lore of Super 7, not every piece is going to have rutile. They're not all going to always going to have every single inclusion, and the only way to really know about that is to take it to, you know, a gemologist or a lapidary or somebody who can, you know, really break it down and tell you what's in it, what it is. Uh, why are you doing that? Now, I know I just kind of answered my own question as to how important it is, but maybe in your own words, you can explain to us why you feel the need to lift the curtain, so to speak.
There's a whole host of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, it comes down to transparency on the market. The invention of trade names is something that is unregulated. I can pick up a pebble from my driveway and say that this is Nicholas Pearsonite. It is super rare. It's only found in one zip code in all of Florida, and you can't find it anywhere else in the world. And
Yeah.
it comes from a square footage of about 3 foot by 3 feet. And I have 4,000 pieces available, and there'll never be another one. And then I can channel all this information about it and never really tell you what it is, never really tell you where it comes from, and it sounds very rare. And
Yeah.
sadly, this is a phenomenon that has occurred thousands of times on this market. There are so many instances of materials that have gotten new names given to them, like that blue onyx. That is a confusing enough trade name, but I understand how we arrived at onyx. But the same material is also sold as aqua calcite, Lemurian aquatine calcite, blue calcite, Argentine
Yeah.
calcite. And how do we figure out which we really mean when all of these terms can be used and are unregulated and relatively
Yeah.
unsanctioned as well? I don't have a formal degree in geology. I'm happy to disclose that, but I've spent a good amount of time working in the earth science field, working firsthand with specimens, doing primary research, and then doing my own kind of at home research. And I love language. I love that words mean things, that they're supposed to mean things, and that the meaning changes. Yeah, let's embrace language is a fluid thing. It's not static. But if we designate something an arbitrary name and then never really tell people why, who is that serving? And
Yeah.
the more we have conversations about sourcing rocks and minerals ethically, the more we have conversations about where our spiritual tools come from and how we should be treating the people involved all along the way, the more we talk about the long term lifespan of capitalism. I really have difficulty. Like, these are the kinds of things that keep me up at night. And I will tell you the moment where I lost my mind about it. I won't disclose names or companies or anything like that, but I was looking for a catalog and I saw a 3-inch sphere of the most common variety of metamorphic rock. We've got three categories of rock: igneous,
Yeah.
sedimentary, metamorphic.
Yeah.
One of the most common forms of metamorphic rock anywhere on the face of the planet. A 3-inch sphere of it for $1,500.
Wow.
If you found the same kind of sphere in like a decorated a decor kind of store, because they've got rock objects. You could
Yeah.
find this kind of thing. You might spend $30 or $40. So like the markup is just so inflated and so arbitrary. And this
Yeah.
this particular catalog has a history of doing this kind of thing. And it was like right there, like I just that was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back, so to speak.
Wow.
And I just decided all people need to know is what they're really buying. There's nothing wrong with buying something with a trademarked name. I own things, but I know what they really are, and I know their relative value. And if you enjoy the mystique, the mystery, the story, the modern day channeled mythology around that specialty name, I'm not taking that away from you. Knowing what something is geologically doesn't take away your personal spiritual experience. Knowing the makeup of something, knowing its country of origin, knowing the kinds of labor or lapidary work or the trade routes involved in that, don't demystify your rocks. In fact, I actually think it enhances our relationship with them because it helps them know them in such a more intimate way. So, what I'm hoping is that we can help the disenfranchised consumers who are really tired of being taken advantage of,
Yeah.
and we can also maybe just a little bit be taken slightly more seriously by the quote unquote serious mineral collectors who, I mean, you can go to the forums like the mineral databases and places where all the rock hounds and mineral scientists and geochemists hang out. They make fun of us. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am eager to see what they say about our market because they often teach me things. And I mean, the truth is that anybody can make up a trade name, and there's no way to regulate that. In theory, some of these trade names get trademarked, registered with the Trademark and Patent Office in the U.S. But also, I've discovered, thanks to the efforts of a couple of my colleagues, that not all of the trade names out there that have that little TM symbol actually have the paperwork filed for them to have the TM symbol. So we
Interesting.
also have this issue where like we're just not following due process to use these kinds of names, and we're trying to scare people off from using them unless they buy them from us. And it's complicated. And
I
at the end
think
of the
like you
day,
said too, it's not regulated. So really it's up to the people to do their own research and to find tools like you're providing and be able to educate themselves because I definitely found myself I got wrapped up early on with Moldavite. The cool thing about my experience with Moldavite is that I didn't know what it was. So I was very fortunate that when I came across my pieces, they were truly just calling to me and I added them to my collection because I thought they were pretty or I felt the energetic charge from them. And then later somebody told me that it was like a thing on TikTok but I've actually had some really cool mystical experiences with Moldavite and I'm grateful that it was natural. That my experience was like not influenced by outside, tales and stories and sensationalism, so to speak. So,
yeah.
for that and Libyan desert glass are like they feel so good energetically to me. Now, I know that you do a lot of classes. You have a Patreon, correct? Do you do courses and like rock identification or anything like that on your Patreon? Or can you tell us more about what your Patreon courses are like?
Yeah. So I started Patreon because I had a finite amount of space to like keep recordings available for previous classes. So I needed a place to put them, but also a place to give people access. So you're going to find replays of my master class series. For about 2 years, every single month, I picked one rock or one closely related family of minerals to do a deep dive on. And we spent 2.5 hours just really going in through all the different layers of its and meaning and metaphor and mineralogy. So you're going to find all of those over on Patreon. I also have a handful of other kinds of classes that I've been able to get in there because I had access to them or owned the rights. On Patreon, though, last year, towards the end of the year, I decided I need to give myself a break. And those deep dives are really wonderful and meaningful, but they're also exhausting. And I have a lot of other really labor intensive projects in the work right now. So I decided to do these kind of lighthearted classes exclusively for Patreon, and I've done them on like how rocks and minerals get their names. I've done them on how to ID crystals in 6 steps. What are the 6 kinds of stages we might take for at home rock and mineral ID? Things like seasonal classes. I did one on spooky crystals for Halloween and one for stones of the solstice. I'm going to do one on fake minerals, spotting fakes and frauds.
Hallelujah. Oh my
So,
God.
uh,
Yes.
so I try to keep
Definitely.
it.
So many fakes on the market right now. Like it blows my mind. And I mean, I know, and again, going back to Moldavite, I've seen so many fake Moldavite everywhere. And now fake Malachite. Um,
But also nothing new is out there. Like you can find texts in the medieval period, in the early modern period. You can find texts in Greece and Rome that talk about how to discern the real from the not real. In ancient Egypt, they learned how to imitate gemstones. And it's always been this kind of thing where there are substitutes that are used for the social symbolism rather than for the material symbolism.
got it.
And I think it's okay to buy something that isn't genuine. We just should know. That's the big thing. And
Yeah.
it's the same with knowing the name of something, knowing the real name, just so we understand the relative value, the relative rarity, the relative anything.
Yeah.
So
What I don't like is when people who should be responsible business owners know that it's fake and they still insist on charging the top dollar for the actual cost of the actual thing. That's where it gets shady, it gets sketchy. It's like, don't, if you know that it's not real, tell people, because if it's still pretty, we'll buy it. Or if we still like it, we still want it, we'll buy it.
and that phenomenon does occur. Sadly, I think the opposite of that is more true. It's too often that the retailer, the
Doesn't
distributor,
know.
they don't know. They're doing the best they can with the tools they've got. Just like any of us, we're all just doing the best we can with the tools we've got. I am human. I am fallible. I make mistakes. We're all going to do that. I have made some really costly mistakes by buying things that weren't what they were purported to be. And so if I can save someone else that heartache, I'm going to do the best I can to spread that word. So, that's one of the things I spotlight a lot on social media. When I get the chance to go to shows, I try to, have examples of those things and, teach people about the science of producing fake and synthetic and treated stones. Because if we know how it happens, then we can understand how to spot it next time it pops up.
One question I had a little while back: blue manganese or manganese. I can't find a lot about it as I've been trying to look it up. I get supplements on Google, but over when I was at Tucson, I purchased some stock inventory of some. They're calling it like blueberry quartz, which I know that can be all sorts of different things. But this stone is, it's like it's got the blue dots in it and it's gray. Can you tell me what manganese is?
So I'm only vaguely familiar with this material. I did a Google image search just to make sure that we're looking at the same thing, and um, I I have not seen a geological analysis. I haven't seen any kind of like detailed analytic report of what it is, but just a really brief overview, like optical assessment of it. It's some kind of metamorphic rock that is high in quartz, but rather schistose. It's got platy, like phyllosilicate minerals, like maybe something like mica and some other things. I don't know of many manganese minerals that as traces in a rock like that would produce splashes of blue. So I could not just pictures tell you why it's called blue manganese in quartz. Manganese on its own is a metallic element. It's a metal on the periodic table.
Okay.
So if it were pure manganese, it would look like veins of ore, veins of metal in there. So it's got to be some compound, some mineral, but
Okay.
never have seen it analyzed. I'm not actually sure what's inside it.
I thank you for that. I know that was more of a personal me curiosity question, just because I feel like I've been trying to look it up and I can't find a whole lot of it. But one of my vendors that I buy from, they were also the people that I purchased blue rose quartz from. which I thought was kind of fascinating. I have a couple of spheres of it, and they're so pretty because I can hold them up to the light and they'll turn orange or yellow, but then I take them into the dark and they're blue, kind of lavendery colors. So if you had to identify, and really quickly, God, I could talk to you all day, and I know I want to wrap it up for our time. If you could give us like your top five starter crystals, what would they be?
So I want to preface this by saying definitely start with what works for you. What you love, what you're attracted to, maybe what you've already got, what's accessible to you. So just because I say these are five great things to start with, it doesn't invalidate that there are many other great things to start with. So, first and foremost, the quartz family. And I'm going to leave it open-ended as the quartz family because they're abundant and accessible and it gives you color options, whether that's, clear quartz or, nice citrine or rose quartz, amethyst, you name it. They're great because they're really multifaceted, no pun intended. They are going to cover broad spectrums. They're going to be good power tools for doing lots of different things. Clear quartz, in particular, being the most broad spectrum of them.
I
I
always
would
say
also,
that clear quartz is like the Swiss Army knife of like, energy working with rocks and crystals. I feel like for me.
yeah, that's a really good analogy. In fact,
Shush.
um, I
Homer
also
agrees.
I also think that as far as we'll say, kind of the nature of today's world. I find that rhodonite is a really wonderful stone, an ally for me in my everyday life. It's one that I probably recommend to people on a daily, if not weekly basis at the very least. Rhodonite is a silicate mineral of manganese, small amounts of calcium in it. It's really stabilizing, nourishing. It lends a sense of fortitude to our emotions so we can kind of lean into the discomfort of life even when it feels overwhelming. It's got this kind of anchoring quality so we don't get swept away by strong current of fear or worry or anger or resentment. I mean, you name it. It's there to support us during that. So that's one I really love for beginners or all people. Labradorite is another great one.
Ah,
um, I think, kind of harkening back to my earlier discussion about wonder being so important to the spiritual path, when you get a nice piece of labradorite and you see that beautiful flash, that sheen that appears within it, that can become a really good meditative focus. The materiality of the stone, it's physical nature is a good thing to distract the mind. And we sometimes need that. We got to trick ourselves into being present until we learn that deeper habit, until we train the mind to be more effective at meditation and all the other fun
yeah.
stuff. But metaphysically, I think in a world that is really rough on sensitive people and understanding that a disproportionately large number of the people that are drawn to all things woo identify as sensitive in some way, labradorite is good for filtering out the kind of extraneous noise of the world. Think of
Ah,
it as kind of like a selectively permeable membrane that helps siphon off the things that are not good, useful, or true. It doesn't mean they don't exist. You just don't have to take them on. You can witness and support without like being burdened by it. So labradorite is a very gentle kind of protective stone that still gives us a sense of light and buoyancy and hope. And it's just darn enchanting. It's wonderful to look at when you've got a beautiful piece.
it really
Um,
is.
and then pick your favorite grounding stone of choice. We all need one good grounder. So maybe that's shungite, maybe that's black tourmaline, maybe you want petrified wood or jasper or anything. But just pick your grounding stone of choice, and then pick something that's really uplifting. So maybe because of accessibility and price, we'll say selenite, because you can find selenite at really, really fair prices. Our
Yeah.
grounding stone is kind of our downer, so we need an upper, something to lift us up and connect us to that higher light or higher consciousness. Selenite is relatively soft, so handle with a relative amount of care, but is available everywhere. It's something that we can use to kind of connect to the light of the soul, the light of the self. It's very inspiring, and I mean, it's got a multitude of uses.
I love that. Thank you for all those suggestions. What are you? What's your the current crystal that you're vibing with right now? Mine is prenite with epidote inclusions. What's yours right now? I'm just curious.
Oh gosh, I have an ongoing love affair with emeralds, and I just bought myself a really nice one, a really big one, like
Ooh,
preternaturally large for emeralds at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. But if I were
wow.
going to pick something that's different for me, I'm currently just beginning to have this kind of romance with a kind of limestone that comes from Somerset in England, in southwestern part of Great Britain, and it's sometimes referred to as a type of marble, but it's not in fact actually marble, um,
Yeah,
but
let's see
it's
it.
it's a limestone that, when cut in cross sections, sometimes reveals these beautiful landscapes, and it's formed
Wow,
of fossilized
that's
algae.
so
It's a type
cool.
of stromatolite fossil.
Looks like a painting.
Yeah.
So neat. I I've had so much fun. Like today just flew by. Thank you so much. If you're ever interested again, or if you have any cool project coming out, I would love to have you back. Maybe we do a part two or something. I adore your energy. I adore your knowledge. And I'm so grateful that you could be here with us today. Really quick, everybody, I will have all of Nicholas's links to his Patreon, Instagram, all the socials, websites. Is there anything that you want to give to our audience before we leave?
How about this for some closing words of wisdom? Just stay really curious. You're never going to know it all. I will never know it all. That's what keeps me learning. And that level of curiosity, I think, is going to drive us forward to, keep learning and pushing the envelope and, expanding our purview. But if our curiosity comes from that really heart centered place, it's also going to encourage us to share it. When
Yeah.
we get this hard won piece of wisdom, don't we want to give it away? Don't we want to make that available for all, so our collective curiosity is going to improve the market as a whole?
That's wonderful advice. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and we will keep searching out wisdom so that we can share it as well. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Don't buy another crystal until you've picked up your copy of Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia by Nicholas Pearson. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider giving a like, a subscribe, a follow, or a glowing review. I would be so grateful. Until next time, Woo family.